begin with you. Your first thoughts on the passage of this treaty. It is being hailed as a historic step towards controlling the trade in arms.
Well, I don't know about it being a historic step because I really don't know the prognosis about its future. Although it has been passed by an overwhelming majority, it has to be ratified by at least 50 states before it comes into effect. And even after coming into effect, it will take another 90 days for it to be part of the regulatory mechanism in the world. As far as India's abstention is concerned, my opinion is it was absolutely the right thing to do, and it should not be surprising because right from the beginning when formal negotiations started in 2006, we haven't changed our stance. We have always been for a regulatory mechanism,
right,
which would be universal, comprehensive, non-discriminatory, and addresses the concerns of national security. Now, we live in a tough neighborhood, and the reason we abstained was because it puts too many rights on the side of the exporting countries, and let us not forget that the US, which had actually under George Bush rejected this resolution until President Obama changed the US stance, controls 40% of the world's arms trade.
Right.
So it puts too many rights on the side of the exporting countries and all the, not all, but much of the obligations on the side of the importing countries, and India is a major arms importer.
Right.
It's a, I mean, this of course highlights again the absolute priority we should give to, as much as we can, indigenization of our arms industries. But that apart, as far as the treaty is concerned, it also does not address our concerns with regard to non-state actors. We have insurgencies within the country, we have insurgencies outside the country, which are issues which directly impinge on our national security. And I think abstention was absolutely the right way to go.
All right. Ambassador Mukherjee, we are going to discuss India's stand on this particular issue in greater detail in just a bit. But Commodore Bhaskar, your first thoughts on the passage of
Well,
this
my
treaty?
first thoughts are, I think the word historic has been used ever since the UNGA had approved this, and I think the Western media particularly has a certain reason to use the word quote-unquote historic.
And
Personally, and landmark. But as an analyst, I would say that it is not historic, but it's very predictable. And I hope that our own media experts will make this semantic distinction, because the reason why it is predictable is that one block of powerful countries are really trying to push through, almost in an intimidatory manner, a resolution that is not equitable. And I think for India, that is the basic issue, that whether it was the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1974, where again the objective was normative, unexceptionable, but the way in which one constituency, quote unquote the powerful, were going about it was neither equitable nor did it advance or protect India's interests. So we stayed out of that, as you know, and that's a very torturous history. But here again, I'd like to make the point, I fully endorse what Ambassador Mukherjee has said, that India did the right thing, which is we did not oppose it. We had good reason to, but we abstained in the fond hope that we can still arrive at a consensus. Because the world has a serious problem. And the problem is that I recall that in the early years after the end of the Cold War, 91, 92, the first global survey was conducted about small arms and light weapons. And in the last 20 years, there is a UN estimate which says that the total number of small weapons and light weapons and small arms in the world today are about 800 equitable. That is the central point, that
Right.
all the advantages that accrue are conferred on the exporting countries. And there are some clauses which are very, very, I would say, adverse for India.
Okay.
Particularly, I suppose we'll come to that later, about how some exporting countries can either gift or present, you know, say that the Western countries or the arms exporters, now India will not interact with them, because that would be a case of, again, I think taking a short-sighted view. We have an objective, try and carry the global community and also ensure that your own national security interests are not adversely impacted.
Right.
So that's the way I would characterize
Rashmi?
it.
As regards to this treaty, the Western world and particularly the US has been trying to cover itself up with a lot of virtue. That is a great milestone which has been achieved. But if you remember, the US Constitution itself enshrines the gun culture. The existence of a militia, of a regulated militia, is necessary for the security of the state, and the people shall bear the right, and the people's right to bear and keep arms shall not be infringed upon. So says the Second Amendment of the US Constitution itself. The US, as Ambassador rightly pointed out, is the dominant player in this arms race. And as per their Congressional Research Survey, which came the latest report, 2011, it says it had exported arms to the tune of $66.3 billion, and the bulk of it went to the West Asian countries, which is the most militarized region in the world. And so these are the realities which we have to keep in mind when we look at the arms trade treaty. And this issue that if there is a dictator somewhere, like the Syrian issue is again and again cited, if there is a dictator somewhere, if he is aligned to my national interest, that I think this is also, the treaty also has to be hailed in a certain respect, because it's the first time when we have an admission that when you need to put up transparent accounts of how much you purchase of conventional weapons, what is the end use. So these are some of the factors which this treaty considers, and this is very important if you have to stop diversion of conventional weaponry, like what is happening now. Peruvian Maoists indulging in cocaine trafficking, they are using Chinese equipment. The jihadi terror groups in Africa, Boko Haram in Nigeria, Al-Sabha in Somalia and Mali, they are using Chinese-make terrorist equipment. Maoists in our country also, large parts that they are pillaging, are using these kind of equipments. So this is a real issue. So at least these are issues which are now on the concern of the international community. But we need to have a more equitable frame to concretize on the clauses and the text of the treaty.
Ambassador Mukherjee, would you agree with Rashmi's assessment there that till now we did not have globally agreed standards to control the trade in arms? This is a deadly and dangerous kind of trade. At least a first step has been taken in this direction.
Look, that it is deadly and dangerous is self-evident. I've spent 12 years in Africa at the edges of areas of conflict, and there are hundreds and thousands, maybe millions, who have died because of conflicts which are fueled by small arms. And the arms trade in the world today, probably along with coffee and oil, is the largest trade in the world. So the need for such a regulatory mechanism is something like motherhood. It is necessary. But is this treaty the answer? And I don't think so. Let's look at a couple of points. Number one, the largest arms exporter in the world may not actually.
To Insight, we are discussing the arms trade treaty adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday. We were discussing how the treaty managed to get a rare vote of support from most member states, but we also know that, including India, 23 countries abstained from voting, which includes two of the world's biggest arms exporters, Russia and China. Could you elaborate on the reservations that were expressed by these two countries?
You know, the way in which I think the arms trade is now being sought to be regulated, each country or each bloc, if you will, is trying to advance its own interests. Now, the traction for this entire thing, as Shiv pointed out, came up in 2006, when there was this ostensible concern about human rights and the need to regulate the movement of arms. Now, Rashmi's point is well taken, that it is desirable to have transparency. It's desirable to have accountability as far as the movement of conventional arms are concerned. When I'd say even nuclear weapons, but that's a separate story altogether. But what happens very often in the conduct of international relations is that countries resort to a certain degree of opacity and also not being as forthcoming when it doesn't suit their interests.
Right.
They also try and introduce legislation at the global level that would allow them a certain discretion in the way in which they are trying to advance their objectives. So the reason why China and Russia, as you rightly pointed out, two of the permanent members of the Security Council, two very significant arms exporting countries, have also chosen to abstain, is that they also feel that the way in which this treaty has been drafted does not suit or advance their interests.
Okay.
There is also a political undercurrent, because this seems to be largely driven by quote-unquote Western countries, as also some NGOs that have been championing human rights.